This is Robert Marglanchi, the Mindshare Learning Report, Canada's Learning and Technology e-magazine. And welcome to This Week in Canadian EdTech MindShareTV podcast with my guest, Dennis Roach, who is the co-founder of Bureau Calendar, on the secrets to Canadian EdTechs tapping into ESSR funding 3 grants in the U.S. It's been a bit of a mystery for many folks and a lot of misconceptions. And we're looking forward to Dennis providing them more clarity on that. Dennis, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
A little bit about Dennis. He's a business builder with extensive experience in startup and high growth environments. Track records include starting and scaling businesses through organic growth and acquisitions, digital innovation, running operations, monetizing new media platforms, fundraising, and multiple company exits. As a co-founder, become a hyper local event content subscription product serving media companies, digital platforms, and local communities. Specialties include startups, digital media, business development, fundraising, social media, and mobile. Wow, you're at the forefront of innovation, my friend. I feel like we're in good company.
Well, yeah, during when COVID hit, Burbio was gathering local data around community events. And this was now 3 years ago. And we started leaning really hard into business intelligence at that point because community life, which we were measuring, was suspended or went away completely. And we started digging into whether schools were open, particularly in the United States. And we became the only service that measured that. And we've since leaned into measuring school finance and school spending, which because what this talk is about. So we have to work with everyone from the federal government to consulting firms like McKinsey, as well as plenty of suppliers. And our core expertise when COVID hit was we were really good at going to super local websites and sources to find hard to find information. And we've been able to deploy that against the education space, particularly education spending.
Amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of COVID and the stimulus funding is what ESSR was intended for. Perhaps you can expand on and unpack the acronym ESSR and 3, the meaning of that, just for the benefit of our viewers.
So ESSR stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. And ESSR1 and ESSR2 were part of very big federal stimulus packages that occurred during the Trump administration. They totaled a little less than $70 billion. And most of that money, almost all of it, has been spent already by schools, and it was spent to get schools open with a lot of COVID mitigation and some technology investments as well. But that money is out the door. And ESSR3, which is what we're really talking about, was a part of the first big stimulus that passed under President Biden in March of 2021. That was called the American Rescue Plan. So sometimes you might see ARP money, stands for American Rescue Plan, used sort of alternately with ESSR3. ESSR3 is $122 billion, and the districts have 3 years to spend it. And it was sent to districts based on what's called Title I. Many of you viewers probably know what that is. It's money. It's basically students who are eligible, who are lower income. So districts with a higher number of students in Title I would get more money than districts that didn't. So that's how the money was given out, and districts have 3 years to spend it.
And so what are the spending pockets or limitations? Is it
so 20% of it? Yeah, no, it's not. 20% of it was required. A couple of things were interesting about this. 20% of it was required to be spent on academic recovery.
Okay.
And a couple of other things that are interesting. One, the districts by statute had to post their plans. So all of the districts had to actually, they were supposed to consult with the public too. Many of them did. Some might think they should have consulted more, but there were board meetings. It was approved, and they did post it. And that's where we got the information. So we have been scouring these districts because that's what we were doing during COVID, scouring these districts for information, and we started compiling these plans. So they have 3 years to spend the money. They have 3 years to spend the money, and I do want to spend a moment on why we are where we are with spending, because there's been a lot of sort of, I can't really tell because we're so close to it, but there's been sort of narratives floating around about whether districts should have spent the money faster or whether it's been spent or not, et cetera. So picture the timeline. March 2021, the legislation's passed. Through the summer 2021, districts find out how much money they actually have officially. Fall of 2021, now we're barely a year ago, a little over a year ago, they design their plans. They're not just going to run around and spend it. They got to design the plans. They got to get it approved by the states. Now, the money was sent to the districts with a lot of flexibility, which was really kind of good and interesting, but they couldn't just spend it. They had to go to the state. So they go to the state and then they post the plans. Now it's October, November, December. Guess what? It's Omicron time. Okay. And many of these districts have just gotten open in person. Places like California and New York, they really never were open the previous year, and certainly not every day. So now all of a sudden it's the middle of Omicron and we're in the middle of a labor shortage because finding teachers and substitutes, and in some days they had 10, 20%. So at that moment, are they gonna launch new programs with this ESSR money, or are they just gonna try and keep their schools functioning?
Right.
Many cases were so many pressures. So basically spending really didn't start of this 100% pie, in terms of percentages, didn't really start until the spring. It made perfect sense to us, having watched this dynamic, that they would start spending the money last spring and into the summer. And now, on balance, the districts have spent a little less than 30% of the money that they've been allocated. They are accelerating how fast they're going to spend it gradually, as you would expect. And they have until September 2024 to spend it, which is almost 2 years away, 19 months away. So
how large is the volume? What is the overall amount?
Well, the overall amount, so it was $122 billion. And for perspective, U.S. education, depending on the numbers you see, spends somewhere between 700 and 800 billion a year. Now, of that 122 billion, 110 of it, 90%, was sent straight to districts. So the governors couldn't get their hands on it. And I think it's sort of bipartisan agreement. The bipartisan agreement was, isn't it good that it goes right to the district? So governors can't start holding on to it and then saying, oh, you got to do this in order to get it. No, they got the money directly. They had to get plans approved. So 110 billion spread over 3 years. And then the states have 12 billion of it, and they deploy it to districts too, and they are. So if you take the overall number of 120 and you say, all right, they're going to spend it on average over 3 years, that's roughly 40 billion. And we know they're it's backloaded a bit. But you take 40 billion or so over 700, 800 billion a year. It's certainly on top of just a 5% bump in spending for 3 years. And it's actually higher than that in many bigger districts because, again, it was allocated based on what's called Title I, which is underprivileged kids, essentially. And they have a higher number of those at some of the bigger districts, some of the city districts, et cetera. So this is a 5 to 10%, in some cases even 15% operating expense increase in the year we are here and into next year as well.
And talk to me about some of the common themes that you see in as far as what they've been spending their money on.
Yeah. So the biggest area is academic recovery. So of the almost 6,000 districts that we have seen spending on things, you have over 1,000 districts. Thousands of districts are spending on tutoring. They're spending on after school, what's sort of broadly called extended day programs like after school, summer school programs. All of those involve purchasing services, everything from tutoring programs to STEM to academic materials and curriculum. That is a very big initiative. Then you've got all sorts of technology tools that are being purchased, infrastructure, and tools that make remote learning more accessible. And so those are big areas. Other big areas are things like school security, things like attendance and engagement is a big category. Obviously, STEM programs, Math ELA. So it really runs sort of a typical gamut of, if you were starting from scratch trying to solve learning recovery, what would you do? So we see
Right.
a very big bucket in that. That is by far the biggest bucket. There also is a big bucket of infrastructure, HVAC and furniture and construction projects. One of the ideas behind the issue was to make learning in a sort of a COVID environment safer. So you have air quality and spacing and infrastructure upgrades. So there's a decent amount of that as well. But
Mhm.
the bulk of it goes to academic recovery programs as well as staffing programs that support them.
And talk to me about emerging patterns that you've seen, and what is the process like for edtechs to garner the
I think one of the opportunities is, and obviously this is what we do, so full disclosure, we're a little bit
Mhm.
biased on it, but these plans were put on the school websites, district websites. And so if you know what the district says they're going to do with the money, you can target the kinds of initiatives that were to who might be interested in buying your product. And there is, in aggregate, obviously you can roll up the numbers, but there is variability between different districts and how they're approaching things. So I think the opportunity for education companies is that the districts themselves have laid out these incremental plans. So that's one thing, and you can target them based on what they're spending. One of the other things I would say is that we hear repeatedly the plans got disclosed very publicly. It all looked from the outside like everyone at the district should know about this because it was put on the
Right.
website, all that kind of stuff. One of the
Sure.
things that we find is that we find from people who work with our data when we send it to them is they will say, yeah, we're talking to a lot of people that didn't know the plan had they didn't know that their initiative was in the plan. So they would go to say someone who was director of early childhood or someone in charge of the math program, and they would say, there's a bunch of money in ESSR put on the website, and they would say, no, I had a little. They would say they didn't know that. I had a little trouble believing that the first time I heard it, and then I heard it about 10 more times from different
Wow.
clients, and I was like, okay, I guess this is. So it actually becomes a tool. Even just having the tool becomes a plan, not just a targeting tool, but it also can be an education tool. The other thing that I'll say, and this is beyond what's in the plans, is that there's going to be a lot of iteration against this. There's going to be a lot of scrutiny against, are these programs working?
Right.
And this is, we are a data company. We do not uh, start arguments about what should be happening or declare that what is happening isn't right. We just present what's happening. I will, but as part of that, we do tend to see where there's bipartisan agreement because we see the same messages from, we get covered in the press a lot, and a
Right.
lot of advocacy groups use our information. There is bipartisan agreement that this money should show results. And I do think that these districts are first of all, they're thinking about that. And this
Right.
is going to be an accelerating trend that selling into these districts and being able to say that at the end of the program, you're going to be able to measure whether it worked, and obviously, ideally, that it will work so that they can demonstrate that the resources were well spent.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, I have heard in the past, and I'm not sure if you're able to verify this. And as you were speaking, I pulled up an example from, as you alluded to, the school districts are posting the information on their websites, Channel View Independent School, and here's their information, and they even have a presentation on the ESSR discussion that they share. So
Yep.
that's impressive. You're quite right. And it's just a matter of doing your homework to tap into these funds. As a Canadian company, in order to do business in the US, I understood that you were required to have an address or a presence in the US market. Does that make sense?
That's not a regulation that I would be familiar with, so I can't really say whether that's entirely true or not. I mean, I
Right.
would imagine if
I
they're
believe it
selling,
is.
yeah, well, if you're able to sell to school districts under normal conditions, I would think you'd be able to sell. I haven't heard that there's any particular strings attached to the ESSER money that wouldn't be attached to normal spending by school districts,
So
but I may be wrong.
at this juncture, Dennis, where we're at currently, what percentage would you estimate is currently available for edtechs to tap into?
So over 70% of the dollars have not yet been spent according to the records. Now, there's a bit of a lag time. And then obviously some districts may know what they want to do and we're just not there yet. But there is certainly well over half the money is still in play. And I would, and it's not my, we defer to our clients and they are the experts on how they operate. But one of the things that's going to happen is these programs reach their second and third year. The districts are going to be deciding on best practices. And when you think about the long game or the terminal value, meaning we want to work with this district for a long time, who's ever seen as the most effective and successful vendor for services in the next year and a half is the one who's going to be most likely to live, to be a part of their plans into the future. So I do think it's not just there's extra money, but I also think that there's this window around innovation that's still occurring. It's going to occur next summer. And again, you have 2 full summers left of this before there's over a year and a half of academic year. So there's plenty of not just money, but there's also time to prove that your solution belongs in the long-term solution for a school district.
Well, I appreciate that insight, Dennis. And I think that, when we're talking about digital transformation and innovation, there's been some great solutions that have come on the scene, pre-COVID and supported learning in a crisis during COVID and beyond. And it's truly a great opportunity for companies to make an impact. Right. At the end of the day, it's truly about helping teachers, help students thrive and reach their full potential. And the more evidence you bring to the equation, the more successful you'll be.
I think that as many as you and many of your viewers would know, the NAEP scores that came out, there's plenty of evidence that districts that were more virtual than others during COVID suffered a bit more, particularly as it relates to children of certain economic backgrounds. However, every state suffered backslid. This is not a situation where XYZ state is okay. And so therefore, and part of it, and among many other things, even places where schools were open during most of COVID, students could opt not to come in. Like in Florida, you had cities that were open every day for learning, but you had almost half the students in some of these districts decided they wanted to be remote because of COVID. So you've got plenty of disruption that even the most successful districts and operating schools were trying to recover from. What does that mean? It means back to what I said before. I think this is a bipartisan issue, academic excellence. And it is not about it's almost very and everyone seems to agree that testing is a way to make sure whether you're successful. And the type of testing, I don't necessarily mean standardized testing, but I just mean results that can be measured concretely. And again, that appears to be something of a bipartisan issue. There's going to be different levels of innovation and school choice and things like that, depending on the state and the local political environment. But I think there's a real agreement on the need to invest in public education, regardless of how you think COVID should have been handled.
With that, thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Dennis Roach. And your insights are greatly valued and appreciated.
Thanks a lot for having me.
That was Dennis Roach, the co-founder of Burio, a hyper-local event content subscription product service, a media company. My name is Robert Merglanchi of the Mindshare Learning Report. Be sure to check out www.mindshare.learning to get your latest issue. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.